Just all right, let's speed it up a bit and we'll just watch the whole thing. I'll put it on like 1.5.
Right. And he had a question about our discussion on that particular podcast.
And just to remind people, we took the view that when Jesus says, Father, if it's possible, take this cup from me, but not my will, but thy will be done, that what he was saying is, let me drink this cup. Let me go to the cross. But not because it's my will, but because it's your will.
Yes, that was our will, even though I think most, even, well, I don't know most, but yeah, probably most would say that what Jesus was saying was, I don't want to go to the cross.
Right.
I don't want to go to the cross, but okay, I'll do it after the temptation in the garden. So at first, most evangelicals would say Jesus did not want to obey the Father. So he, at that, hour and a half, whatever it was,
right,
was like, I don't want to do what you want to have me do.
And one of the things we pointed out is in John 12:27, which is just a short time before he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, he says, now my soul is troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? But for this purpose, I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Just shortly before this, Jesus is saying, I'm not going to ask the Father to save me for this hour because this is why I came. This is the finished work. This is what.
Yeah, you know what? They brought up this point. Okay, so actually, maybe I'm going to slow this down because it's kind of hard to keep up with what they're saying. But this is the thing. So what they're saying right now is that when Jesus said in John 12, he goes, Father, what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, I was sent for this hour. Something like that, right? He says something like that. But the fact is, he's saying, now is my soul troubled. If his soul is troubled, doesn't that mean that he's having trouble in his soul? Like and even that comment that he makes there, he's like, what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, I was sent for this hour. It's like he's having this inner conflict, right? Isn't that what he's talking about there? I don't understand. I don't understand why they think this is some great argument for whatever they're saying, you know? What do you think? What do you think, Laurie? What do you think? The cup is Jesus' anguish? That's interesting. But it's kind of like maybe I don't know. Maybe the cup of his wrath. Because remember, you know what he's saying even with John and James. John and James come and they ask him, can we sit on your right hand and on your left? And he says, can you drink the cup that I will drink? You know, so it's the cup of, I think it's the cup of God's wrath. But when these get, I don't understand why they think this John 12 argument is such a great argument. Because let me show you that one, John 12. Man, StreamYard is like kind of really inefficient on this thing, but it's overall it's a good website. But anyway, so so can you see that? Now is my soul troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. For this cause came I unto this hour. So to me, what he's saying is he's verbally explaining his own inner conflict and inner anguish. He's saying, my soul is troubled. If he was just like, oh, I'll never ask Father not to send me to the cross, you know, then this thing wouldn't even come into his mind. But the fact that this thing came into his mind, what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? It came into his mind. So John is kind of showing that Jesus had this inner conflict. And the other three gospel writers, they tell us this kind of same inner conflict in the story of the garden, you know? That would be my interpretation. I don't know. What exactly is their point, though? Their point is they're just trying to say that Jesus never asked the Father to spare him from the cross. He never did that because he was like just so on point. So look. So now they're talking about that John 12, right? So yeah, that's obviously illustrating the fact that Jesus is having troubled. His soul is troubled. These guys are making it seem as if no, he never doubted for 1 minute. He always wanted to just go to the cross. That was, you know. But that John 12 actually kind of disproves their argument. Is he literally says his soul is troubled, and the fact that even came into his mind, it came into his mind to say, "What shall I ask? What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour." So John is depicting the same thing, the same inner conflict that Jesus is experiencing. He's depicting it here in John 12, and the other writers depicted it in the garden, but it is an inner conflict Jesus is experiencing, you know? Anyway, sorry, I wasn't even playing for you the thing, right? I was actually just showing you the thing the whole time. Sorry, my bad. But anyway, so the fact is, I was playing the video, but the fact is, what they were saying is that they keep repeating that thing about John 12.
Pointed out is in John 12:27, which is
Yeah.
just a short time before he's in the Garden of Gethsemane.
I saw
He
part
says,
of
"Now
it.
my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? But for this purpose I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Just shortly before this, Jesus is saying, "I'm not going to ask the Father to save me for this hour because this is why I came. This is the finished work."
Again, John is just depicting the conflict that Jesus is having. Father, why did that even thought come into his head? If he didn't have any kind of idea of asking the Father to spare him, why would that even enter his brain? And then, okay, yeah, so he said that. Then maybe a few hours later, after dinner, and now it's like the night of, and he's getting a little bit nervous. Then he had more trouble about it. But he says his soul is troubled. His soul, now is my soul troubled. That means he's having conflict.
Work. This is what the Father sent me to do. I've got to do this to finish the work. That's why his triumphant cry right at the end, "It is finished." It's all tied with Jesus wanting to go to the cross. So, but this leads to Matt's question.
Well, but most evangelicals would say, yeah, all that's true. From the very beginning, even at his baptism, Jesus knew he was going to the cross. You know, it is written, you know, the Christ has to die, and Jesus obviously knows that. But most evangelicals would say that when he got to the garden, it changed.
Well, what people have here is Jesus having a split personality at this point. And they say in his humanity,
Exactly.
he did not want to go to the cross, but in his deity, he did want to go to the cross. So when Jesus says,
It's not a split personality. Okay, Jesus has two natures. And according to the way that the people who formulated the Trinity doctrine, right? They saw the will, the human will, as part of your nature, not part of your person. So although Jesus is one person with two natures, that's why he has two wills. So that's why. That's the personality. And they shouldn't say that, because that's just like I mean, once again, these guys are both PhDs. They've studied theology. They must obviously know that it's not some kind of simplistic split personality stupid thing like that. Don't you know anything about what we're talking about?
"Want to go to the cross," but in his deity, he did want to go to the cross. So when Jesus says, "If it's possible, let this cup pass from me," that's him speaking in his humanity.
Right.
But when he says, "Should I say, Father, save me from this hour," in John 12:27, that's him speaking from his deity.
Right.
And so you've got this. The problem with that view is that's heresy. You see, because Jesus was one person. He wasn't a split personality. Now, of course, many people who argue Jesus.
Again, I don't know. That's not heresy. What are you talking about? How is that heresy?
Should I say, "Father, save me from this hour," in John 12:27, that's him speaking.
Oh, I'm sorry about your dog, bro. But yeah, you're right. Well, they're trying to say basically that Jesus, no, they're not trying to say anything like docetism or anything like that. They're just trying to say that Jesus is both man and God. Therefore, being a God man, he's there's no sin in him whatsoever. Therefore, he couldn't even possibly have this moment of doubt or anything, you know?
Him speaking from his deity.
Right.
And so you've got this possible, let this cup pass from me, that's him speaking in his humanity.
Right.
But when he says, should I say, Father, save me from this hour in John 12:27, that's him speaking from his deity.
Right.
And so you've got this, the problem with that view is that's heresy. You see, because Jesus was one person. He wasn't a split personality. Now, of course, there are people, many people who argue Jesus had two wills, and the two wills didn't have to be compatible. But in my estimation, that makes no sense. Jesus had one will. He was one person. And we don't see, it's not that we see a mixture.
So this is actually the heresy. When you say that Jesus had one will, that's the heresy. It's called what's it called again, man? No, is it Eutychianism or something like that? I don't even know what it is. Anyway, the point is that's the heresy. When people try to say that Jesus only had one will, that is the thing that was a heresy, or it was declared a heresy, back in like the 1300s or something like that. But no, so they're the ones. They're trying to say that Jesus had one will. What are you saying?
Jesus had one will. He was one person. And we don't see, it's not that we see a mixture of his deity and his humanity. He just is God and man together in one body. And there's no conflict with that.
Well, see, that's the other thing about the deity of Christ. I mean, the Orthodox statement of his deity is that he is one person, two natures, one person.
Right.
Well, how can one?
Oh yeah, thanks, Glory. Thanks. Yeah, Thelitis, because Thelema is the will. I should have known that. That's the Greek thing. Yeah. So yeah, what they're teaching is monothelitism, that's the heresy. Not the idea that what we're saying is not a heresy. What are you talking about? This guy trying to accuse us of heresy when he's the one. He just literally just said that Jesus had one will, right? And that is the literal heresy of monothelitism. Wow, these guys are wicked.
One person have a split personality like that?
Well, they say, what is it? The two natures is another question.
Right.
There's Monothelitism, right? Which is the idea that he had one nature that was this nature which was united in that his divine nature and his human nature were in agreement. For example, when we're
No, that's not even what monophysitism. It's monophysitism in English, right? In Greek, they would say kind of monophysitism, right? But what did he just say? Man,
is another question.
Right.
There's Monothelitism, right? Which is the idea that he had one nature that was this nature which was united in that his...
No, monophysitism is not that he had one nature. It's the idea that his body like combines, or what is it actually? Monophysitism. That's the one where it says that. Wait. Okay, let's look up some of this stuff, guys. A monophysite is a Christian who believes that Jesus Christ has a single divine nature rather than two distinct natures. Okay, so we're monophysitists. All right, good. We're good. The word monophysic comes from the Greek words meaning mono, single, physics meaning nature. Entirely divine, even though he took on human flesh, monophysicists believe Jesus is the word. So duophysitism or something like, or diophysitism, that's the one that's a heresy. But with this one, with the monothelitism, that's a heresy. Oh, wait. I think I lost my sound here. Hang on.
We're in agreement. For example,
you guys hear it?
When we're glorified, right? That was this nature which was...
Sorry, you guys. I don't know what's going on with my sound. I think it's weird. All right, one sec. Let me check this out. All right, you can hear it, right? All right, it should be all right.
Right. How can one person have a split personality like that?
Well, they say, what is it? The two natures is another question.
Right.
There's Monothelitism, right? Which is the idea that he had one nature that was this nature which was
Oh, that's no, wait. Monophysitism is a heresy because he has two natures. He has two. It's one person and two natures. Oh yeah, wait. Monophysitism is the Christian belief that Jesus Christ has a single divine nature. Oh, so monophysitism is also a heresy. Oh no way. Oh, so monophysitism is also a heresy. Okay. Anyway, let's hear these guys out.
right, which is the idea that he had one nature that was this nature which was united in that his divine nature and his human nature were in agreement. For example, when we're glorified, right, in eternity future, will we want to sin ever again?
No.
So will we have anything in our nature that will be contrary to the will of God?
No.
So how would Jesus have anything contrary to the will of God unless he didn't have perfect humanity? Which is what a lot of people believe, that he had basically sinful humanity and that he basically had a sin nature. And so he basically could have desires that were contrary to God. Well, they don't say that. What they say is, wait a minute, because he was born of a virgin, he didn't get a sin nature from his father. But yet they say, he.
I don't know, man. Look, you see, now when they get into the sin nature thing, that's confusing too. We talked about a little bit about this. Remember we had the live about the sin nature thing? So look, man, this is weird right now what these guys are saying. But what they just said, I don't know what they're talking about, right? But before they were saying that he has one will, which is a heresy. And just now they're trying to say something about like how he has one nature. What is that what I just heard these people say? I don't get what's going on here.
To the will of God unless he didn't have united in that his one.
Right. Well, how can one person have a split personality like that?
Well, they say, what is it? The two natures is another question.
Right.
There's monothelitism, right, which is the idea that he had one nature that was this nature which was united in that his divine nature and his human nature were in agreement. For example.
Yeah, so who's saying that, Bob? Who's saying that? The people who's saying that he has the one will that's divine and another will that's human. They're not monophysicists, right? So why would he bring that up? These guys are confusing. These guys are weird. I think they are shells. Why do they talk like this? This guy literally just said that Jesus had one will. You know? And now he's trying to explain the position of some people who disagree with him and say that Jesus had two natures and the divine nature did not wanted to go to the cross. The human nature did not want to go to the cross. That's the debate here, right? But instead of talking about our view, which is diophysitism, he starts talking about monophysitism. Why? Why would you talk about that? What are you talking about? These guys are confusing weirdos.
Example.
Now, don't get me wrong. I learned a lot from these guys. I kind of like, I guess I owe them something or whatever, but they're weirdos, man. This is weird. What he's just saying now is very weird. Well, let's watch the other videos too.
Divine nature and his human nature were in agreement. For example, when we're glorified, right, in eternity future, will we want to sin ever again?
No.
So will we have anything in our nature that will be contrary to the will of God?
No.
So how would Jesus have anything contrary to the will of God unless he didn't have?
No, because Jesus didn't have a perfected body yet. He had a flesh body like a normal human being. He did not have the perfected body of a risen Christ yet. What is so hard about this to understand, Bob Wilkin? What's your problem? Why are you so confusing and weird?
God.
No.
So how would Jesus have anything contrary to the will of God unless he didn't have perfect humanity? Which is what a lot of people believe, that he had basically sinful humanity and that he basically had a sin nature. And so he basically could have desire.
Yeah, so then now that's this sin nature thing. So, Jesus didn't have a sin nature. And I guess so he's trying to make the argument that the sin nature comes down through the Father. And because Jesus didn't have a human father, his father is like the Holy Ghost or whatever, or something like that. That's what this guy's trying to say right now. Which is another one of these things like where people try to say Jesus has some kind of special like nature or something, you know? I don't like this stuff, man. I don't like the way these guys play fast and loose with this stuff. Like this is not good, man.
Desires that were contrary to God. Well, they don't say that. What they say is, wait a minute, because he was born of a virgin, he didn't get a sin nature from his father. But yet they say, but yet he could want to disobey the father. Well, isn't wanting to disobey the father something that comes from the flesh, not from the spirit?
I don't think we discussed this in September, but I want to run it by you, and let's just put it down on our level. Okay.
Yeah.
Hold on. Hey, thanks, Chris. God bless you, brother. Miss you, man. I'm gonna come on your show soon. But I'm trying to understand what
Sin
these guys
nature
are
from
saying.
his father. But yet they say, but yet he could want.
When he said, yeah, through the mother. Why can't you have the sin nature through the mother? So the sin nature thing, right? Like, this is so confusing. These guys don't know, or either they don't know, or they're purposely trying to confuse people. Because this is weird. Because okay, there's this idea of the original sin that kind of like Augustine would talk about how it comes down to the father through the father's sperm or something like that. You know? And then other people say, no, it's like this there's this sin nature in the humans. All humans have the sin nature. And I guess what those people are saying is that when Adam ate the fruit, then his flesh became corrupted. Okay. Well, whatever. I don't like remember we were talking about this. I don't really believe that either anymore. But anyway, that's what people say. So, but that doesn't mean that it's only going to come through the father. Why would you think that? You know, that could come through the mother. Why not? It only comes through the father. What are you talking about? And then now it's like, this is weird, dude. This is super weird. So there's like three things they said wrong here, right? They said that Jesus has one will. That's not true. Then they said that it was weird how they were trying to talk about monophysitism when they're supposed to be diophysitism. We're diophysitists, okay? We believe that Jesus had two natures, not one nature. Anyway, it doesn't matter that much, but this is kind of weird.
Could want to disobey the father. Well, isn't wanting to disobey the father something that comes from the flesh, not from the spirit?
I don't think we discussed this in September, but I want to run it by you, and let's just put it down on our level. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's say I know that something is sinful.
Right.
I know that something is contrary to God's word.
Right.
Okay. Let's say I want to have an affair.
Right.
Or okay, I'm married. I want to have an affair. I know that's contrary to God's will.
Right.
Would it be sinful for me to say, I really want to do that? Would that be a sinful desire? Lord, I want to have this affair, but if you still don't want me to do it.
Not my will, but thy will be done.
Your will be done. Wouldn't that be a sinful desire?
It seems.
Why? Why is that a sinful desire? What are you talking about? First of all, it's not comparable. Okay, it's not comparable at all. Everybody knows adultery is obviously a sin in practically any circumstance, but there might be some circumstance where you're like, you know, like what? Let's say like you're married, right? But then you get trapped on a desert island with some woman for 10 years. Okay, maybe you might pray to the Father and say, look, I know I'm married, and I don't know, maybe my wife divorced me, maybe she did, I don't know. But I'm here with this woman, and we're both very lonely, and you know, whatever. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with Jesus saying, hey, Father, is there any way you could, you know, possibly, is there any possible way you could get out of this? There's no sin with that. What's the sin with that? He's asking him. He's not contemplating to just do it just to run away or whatever. He's asking the Father. He's just asking, like, is there any other way you could do this? Any other possible way? What's wrong with that? Why are they just making such a big deal out of that? And then they make this thing like, oh, he's a perfect man. He can never even contemplate sin or something. What are you talking about? Why couldn't he contemplate sin? Why isn't he supposed to be tempted in all points? Tempted in all points like us, right? These guys are weird, man. They make me mad. I like them. I like them, but kind of they're weird.
People don't want me to do it.
Not my will, but thy will be done.
Your will be done. Wouldn't that be a sinful desire?
It seems to me
to pray for it. Pray for it. Say, Lord, let me do this.
You would need to confess that desire. Well, of course, part of the problem here, Ken, and I hope y'all can hear my struggling, because there is a difference between temptation and sin.
Now.
Sin. Luther used to say, and I think this is, at least I repeat this a lot on the air, and I think it's true, you can't keep the birds from flying overhead, but you can keep them from nesting in your hair. So if you see a beautiful woman and the fleeting thought comes to you that she's beautiful, and you might entertain the thought, what would it be like if I was with her? But then you acknowledge that's a wrong thought, and you turn your thoughts to the Lord and away from that, and you don't allow that thought to bring forth to sin. Well, then it seems to me you haven't sinned. But on the other hand, if you do that and then you start fantasizing about that,
Well, or even
you've now crossed the line.
or even
This is a terrible thought experiment, okay? They're comparing Jesus. Jesus is about to go to the most excruciating death. The word excruciating comes from that Latin word for crucifixion, okay? It is the most painful death, one of the most painful deaths anyone's ever experienced. He's about to go to it. It's not comparable to you contemplating having sex with some woman who's not your wife. It's not comparable in any way. And also, like I say, there are situations where a person might think, hey, maybe, I know I'm married, but like I say, if a person is trapped on a desert island for 10 years or whatever, man, whatever, who knows? There's many reasons why these things might be possible. You could pray to God about it. There's nothing wrong with praying to God to ask if this thing that you want to do, which maybe normally is considered a sin, but is there any circumstance where maybe I could get out of this one, Father, and just do this thing? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a sin to do that. This is dumb.
or even ask God, because that's what Jesus does in the garden, right? I want to do this.
Am I being too mad? Am I being too mad about it? But you know what's getting me mad is because they first said that thing about Jesus had one will. That's weird. And now they're saying this thing about and then they start going about monophysitism when it's actually diophysitism. And then now they're talking about this weird stuff.
Cross the line.
Or even ask God, because that's what Jesus does in the garden, right? I want to do this. I know it's not your will, but I'm asking you to do this for me. I mean, that's what he's doing in the garden. If we understand, let this cup pass from me, what Jesus is saying is, I know this is not your will, but I want you to do it for me.
Oh, I want you to let me not go to the cross.
Yes. I mean, isn't that what?
If that's possible.
If that seems to be.
Yeah, he says, if it's possible. And then he says, but not my will, but yours. So the simple understanding is that he has a will, which is a human will, which is also directly in line with our Trinitarian doctrine of the past 1700 years. So that would be the simple explanation, Bob Wilkin. And you're making this confusing, weird explanation, either because you're just very weak on theology, you don't understand these very old doctrines that have been in the church for 1700 years, or you're a shill, or I don't know what your problem is. But this is dumb. This whole conversation is dumb. It's embarrassing. This is ridiculous. You just said Jesus had one will. Are you mental?
To be what the.
Of course, that's another issue because Jesus knew it was not possible.
That's my point.
So it wouldn't make any sense.
Right.
But would it be sin? Probably not. If all he's saying is, hey, I'm ready to go to the cross, but is there some other way? Even though I know there's no other way. By the way, James 1:15 comes to mind. That's where James says, then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. The desire itself is not sin.
You know how he says, not my will, but yours be done, but thine be done. These guys are trying to say that what he means there is not because it's my will, but because it's your will. But that's not what he said. He said, Father, if thou be willing, I mean, this is the thing. This is why the King James is better too, right? Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Remove it. Don't make me drink it. Take it away from me. But nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. So there's a difference between his will and the Father's will. What are you talking about, you absolute clowns?
But when it achieves a certain state of maturity, it has conceived. He's using the picture of birth here, and he's saying it gives birth to sin. And then sin, when it's full grown, when the sin matures, it brings forth death.
Right.
So what he's saying is, in your sequence here, if you're thinking about an affair, that in itself is not yet sin. But if you dwell on it, it becomes sin. Even before you have the affair, it becomes sin, right? Didn't Jesus say, if you lust in your heart after a woman?
Sure. And so my question would be, I know we don't know the answer to this. If in the garden he's saying, okay, I know it's your will that I go to the cross. I don't want to go to the cross, and I want you to do that for me. Is that dwelling on it? Is that like, okay?
Probably not. But, the whole thing to me is nutty because Jesus did want to go to the cross. He said that just before this, and his whole life was
Again, he thinks it's nutty. These guys aren't reading what it says. In John 12, he says, my soul is troubled, right? And he said, and the fact that he even said that, what shall I ask? Father, save me from this hour, is because he was thinking that was in his head. That's what he's thinking about. So he's being tempted to think like that. That's obviously what he's saying. This guy thinks it's nutty that we just read what it actually says and we don't just impose our beliefs into it. And he thinks it's nutty that we understand theology, the Trinity, and he doesn't get it. And he's calling us nutty. I mean, look, if you want to believe your stupid false beliefs, go ahead, Bob Wilkin. Don't call us nutty. You're a PhD. You're supposed to be the leader of this movement, or you're one of the leaders of this free grace movement. You guys never even once debated FGA or anything. You guys are a bunch of sit on your hands, your stupid conferences. Why do you have 10 conferences? You can't debate those FGA guys. What a joke. And now you're telling us we're nutty? We're nutty because we know theology? What a joke.
was pointed to the cross. Remember in Matthew 16, when he tells them, I'm going to Jerusalem, I'm suffering, I'm going to be mistreated, they're going to kill me, and I'm going to rise on the third day. And Peter says, God forbid, meganoita, this will never happen to you, right?
Right.
And then Jesus rebukes him. Get behind me, Satan.
All right.
And then he says, deny yourself.
Why do you think Jesus had to freak out on him like that? It's because he's probably suffering the same thing. He wants to. Jesus, like Peter's telling him, no, and he's tempted. That's why he says, get thee behind me, Satan, because Satan is tempting him. He's being tempted, you absolute idiots. Anyway, I don't even know why I'm getting so mad. Why am I getting so mad? Because these guys are probably shills. This is confusing, weird nonsense. This is foolishness. The fact this guy has a PhD and he doesn't know what monophysitism is. I mean, I didn't know either, right? I had to look it up. Whatever. At least I'm not trying to make a video about it, talk to thousands of people about it, teach them. You're supposed to be a leader in our movement. You're a PhD. You can't get this stuff right. You don't know what you're talking about. This thing. Jesus had one will. What?
Take up your cross and follow me. Now, Jesus is not denying himself, taking up his cross and following him. Wasn't Jesus going to take up his own cross? So it seems to me this whole discussion doesn't make any sense. And it leads ultimately to a very confused God-man, a very confused Messiah who is torn. And I would say, no, that's not right.
And it's certainly out of character his whole life. I mean, his whole ministry, my hour has not yet come. He knows his hour is coming. He knows his hour is coming. But it's just that
But now he says, my hour has come.
Right. And so now for an hour and a half in the garden, he's struggling with it.
I don't think he's struggling. I mean,
that's the typical evangelical view of it.
But I would say is the agony he's going through is recognizing the pain and suffering that he's about to undergo.
And he wants it to pass through him.
Right. But if you read in the Old Testament about this idea of the cup of God's wrath, it never passes for a nation or a people group or a city until they have drunk from the cup. In other words, if the Canaanites are to drink the cup of God's wrath, that is not going to pass until they drink it. When Jesus says, let this cup pass from me, he's saying, let me drink of the cup. Let me go.
No, why? What are you saying that? Like, first of all, so what is this? This guy's trying to say that the cup passes after they drink it. So they drink the cup and then it passes? Is that what he's trying to say? Where is that in the Old Testament, Bob Wilkin? Can you show me that? What a joke. So in the Old Testament, these cities or whatever, like Nineveh or whatever, they drank from the cup and then it passed. I guess that's what he's trying to say. Right? We'll try to find that in a minute. What a joke.
go to the cross.
That was our view in September.
right.
All right,
And
God bless,
we're not
bro.
going to have time to
Well,
get into Matt's
we'll
question.
do part two.
We'll do a part two.
We'll do a part two on Matt's question. Right.
But what I want to say is that our Savior wanted to go to the cross, willingly went to the cross. Remember Hebrews 12, verse 2, who for the joy, or verses 1 and 2, who for the joy set before him endured the cross.
The joy of the coming
despising-
kingdom, of
Yeah.
reigning over the coming kingdom.
Right.
Right.
So
Yeah. He wanted to. We understand that he wanted to. We also understand that being a human being, right? He had temptations, and he wanted to because he wanted to serve God with his mind, but his flesh didn't want to. And I don't know, like they're gonna try to say, oh, he had perfect flesh and Jesus can't even possibly sin and all this stuff. Like these guys think I mean, I guess that is kind of the majority view. So there's this view that it's impossible for Jesus to sin. And in a way that's true because he's God, right? But in another way, it's like as a human, his human body, I think he was capable of sinning. He just didn't because he's God or because he's just so awesome.
he's our model.
All right, God bless, bro.
If you go to the book of Hebrews, which the question for Matt is going to be about,
And that'll be part two here.
he's
coming.
our model.
Right.
And so we should follow him. Like Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Well, we're out of time. I know I've stumbled around here a lot in this one. I hope I have provided something helpful. I know Ken has, but
Nah, you're embarrassing. You're embarrassed. This is not helpful. This is confusing. You should do better. I don't know why you guys think, like, you guys come on the stupid radio show. It's like a big joke to you. You come on here, you're making your dumb jokes. Monothelitism. He. Why don't you know what you're talking about? You're coming on here, 10,000 people are subscribed to your stupid channel, right? You're a leader in this movement, and you're teaching this weird stuff. You're trying to tell us Jesus has one will? Are you mental?
my encouragement to all of you is to meditate on this important subject.
The following is a listener-supported ministry from the Grace Evangelical Society.
Today on Grace in Focus, we are continuing a discussion from yesterday's episode. Did Jesus want to avoid the cross? This is part 2. We have a little more to discuss about it. Thank you for being here today. This is Grace in Focus, the ministry of the Grace Evangelical Society. We come to you from North Texas, and our website is faithalone.org.
I did a podcast where we suggested that Jesus was not, as normally understood, saying, I don't want to go to the cross. He wanted to go to the cross, and he wanted to drink the cup.
And he was asking the Father to let him drink the cup.
That's right. Let me drink the cup, the wrath, let it be poured out. Let me drink it fully, let it pass through me. And it wasn't that he was, his human nature was saying, I don't want to go to the cross, and his divine nature was saying yes. So that's our position.
And by the way, we forgot to mention in the last show that we published
So wait.
that'll let him drink the cup.
That's right. Let me drink the cup, the wrath, let it be poured out. Let me drink it fully, let it pass through me. And it wasn't that he was, his human nature was saying, I don't want to go to the cross, and his divine nature was saying yes. So that's our position.
And by the way, we forgot to mention in the last show that we published an article. It was a reprint of an article done by Dr. Craig Blazing on this question in our journal.
It originally appeared in the Journal of the Evangelical Theological Society in '79. So it's an old article.
Yeah.
Right. But we did it, a year and a half ago or something?
Yeah, it'll probably be online around the time the show airs. If not, it'll be online soon. We're not getting it. Feel free to sign up for it. Or you can see it on.
Would Hebrews 5:7-9 contradict our position on what happened at Gethsemane? And I'll go ahead and read.
I'm going to take a wild guess and say no. Okay.
Well, he's wondering how we would interpret Hebrews 5:7-9.
Why can't we be like all the other Bible teachers and just say no and move on? Why don't you just move on?
The Puritan about our passage, and his wife said, Dan, your prayers and supplications, that certainly would include Gethsemane, right? Because he prayed stuff out. Okay, so here's the verses. Hebrews 5:7. Who in the days of his flesh, talking about the Lord, when he had offered up prayers and supplications, that certainly would include Gethsemane, right? Because he prayed 3 times in the Garden of Gethsemane with vehement cries and tears, and that would certainly apply to Gethsemane. He was crying to him who was able to save him from death. And you could see where someone say, well, that's Gethsemane too. Save me from this hour, that kind of thing. And was heard because of his godly fear. Though he was a son, yet, and I think this is the key, he learned obedience by the things he suffered. And so, Matt, I think, and others might say, well, didn't he learn to obey here? So he perhaps didn't want to obey, let's say in his human nature. He didn't want to obey, so he's in the garden.
That seems to be what Matt's implying.
Right, yeah. Or he might say, I hear this view, that Jesus is crying out to the Father in the garden, save me from this hour. And then it says in verse 9, having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him. So,
Okay, now a couple things real quick. You said several times now, Father, save me from this hour.
right.
Actually, Jesus never said that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
He doesn't say it here in this Hebrews passage. He says he's crying out to the one, how does he put it? Who
Right.
was able to save him from death.
Right.
But if you look at the John 12:27 passage, the same language is used. He says, what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour?
That's where I was getting the hour
Right.
from. Right.
But he says, but for this purpose I came. Father, glorify your name. In other words, he's asking the question rhetorically, and his answer is no.
Right.
I'm not going to say, Father, save me from this hour.
But the typical evangelical view is in John 12, he's saying, hey, listen, no, I'm headed to the cross. No problem here. I'm one person. I'm united in this. I'm going, my two natures. But when I get to Gethsemane,
all of a sudden I'm split now.
Now I'm split. And that's where I'm adding, now save me from this hour.
Right. I get it.
Yeah.
But you don't actually have that in John or Hebrews or anywhere else. And by the way, notice verse 9, and having been perfected, right? And having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him. And you have a commentary on Hebrews, and there's the only place in the Bible where eternal salvation appears. And it's not referring to what we normally think of as eternal salvation, right?
Right. In Hebrews, salvation is being delivered from your enemies, ruling with Christ, being one of Christ's medicoi or one of Christ's companions.
Yeah, this is the thing. They're kind of ignoring the critical part of this thing. Hebrews 5:7, who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications, with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard, and that he feared death, or feared God, maybe, I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm gonna put this in the chat, but this is weird, man. These guys are confusing weirdos. They're all right,
Not
but
referring to what we normally think of as eternal salvation, right?
Right. In Hebrews, salvation is being delivered from your enemies, ruling with Christ, being one of Christ's medicoi or one of Christ's companions, Psalm 45, 6 and 7, right? Those who are going to rule with Christ. He becomes the one who leads us to this. He is our example. Hebrews 12, 1 and 2, right?
Right.
Fix your eyes on him.
But wasn't he already perfect before he endured the cross?
Certainly in holiness and righteousness. So how did he learn obedience?
And how did he become perfect?
Exactly.
It's coming. It'll be here before you know it. What am I talking about? The Grace Evangelical Society's National Conference 2025, May 19th through 22nd at Camp Copa.
wasn't he made perfect when he was risen? Isn't that the made perfect thing? But then he got the perfected body and stuff.
An absolutely beautiful campground in North Texas, right on the lake, with lots of recreation, great food, a great place to stay. faithalone.org.
Because he was tempted not to go to the cross, but he learned through this to trust in the Lord. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane is saying, okay, I don't want to go, but I'm going to pray to you, and I'm going to get through this and do what you want me to do, even though right now I don't want to do it.
Yeah, which as I've said, makes no sense to me.
Yeah, but that is...
Wait, what are these guys trying to make a joke out of it?
Through this and do what you saying, okay, I don't want to go through this to trust in evangelical view of this would be he was perfected because he was tempted not to go to the cross, but he learned through this to trust in the Lord. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane is saying, okay, I don't want to go, but I'm
No. We're not saying that. We're saying he learned obedience by going to the cross, and then he was perfected when he was given his perfect body. That's what perfected is in the next verse. So these guys are just confusing. They take it as a joke, you know. They come on this stupid radio show, and it's just like joke, and then they kind of try to explain something. Like, take it more seriously at least. Like, do some research. Just have some notes, know what you're talking about before you address these issues. I swear these guys just come on and just freestyle it. Like, oh, hey, what question do you have now? Let's just try it out. It's like me reacting to videos on YouTube. It's like, dude, you guys are the PhDs. You guys are the ones. This whole community, thousands of people look to you guys for leadership. You come on here, you make it into a joke. You start calling us nutty, because we actually have a thoughtful understanding of these scriptures and also the doctrine of the Trinity that you don't seem to understand. You absolute claffies.
Tempted not to go to the cross, but he learned through this to trust in the Lord. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane is saying, okay, I don't want to go, but I'm going to pray to you, and I'm going to get through this and do what you want me to do, even though right now I don't want to do it.
Yeah, which as I've said, makes no sense to me.
Yeah, but that is
Let's hear this again.
because he was tempted not to go to the cross, but he learned through this to trust in the Lord. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane is saying, okay, I don't want to go, but I'm going to pray to you and I'm going to get through this and do what you want me to do, even though right now I don't want to do it.
Yeah, which as I've said,
No, he's praying to God to not do the thing. But then he's like, okay, I understand though, it's your will. Your will is more important than my will, so I'm going to do it. But if there's any way you can get me out of this, okay, I'll take it. But if, okay, I understand your will, let's go, let's do it. But he was just so desperately, emotionally hurting right there that he felt like he had to do that.
Do this and do what you want me to do, even though right now I don't want to do it.
yeah, which as I've said, makes no sense to me.
Yeah, but that is by far the most common way of seeing what's going on in the Garden
Right,
of Gethsemane.
right. I just don't get it. I understand where it's coming from, but it doesn't make sense to me because Jesus.
You know what's funny? Now he's just like, oh, I just don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. Before he was saying it's a heresy. That's what he said in the other video. He literally said it's a heresy. And then he said Jesus has one will, which is, that means you're a heresy, you absolute idiots. Now you're joking around with this other old goof. You two old goofs. You come out here, you make your stupid jokes all the time. Why don't you explain this thing properly? Why don't you look it up or something? What's wrong with you? How dare you?
Jesus constantly wanted to do the will of the Father. He never wanted to contradict the will of the Father in his humanity.
Jesus never ever wanted to ever do anything contradictory to the will of the Father. How is he tempted in all points? He's tempted in all points, right? So can he be tempted enough to just pray for the Father to just get him out of the cross? Can he? Isn't that not possible? Why are you so like, yeah, crying tears of supplications? What are you talking about? You're just ignoring. You're like, they're not reading these passages. You know what they're doing? They're reading it. They're it's eisegesis. They're just literally just putting things into it. Like when in Luke 22, it says, Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. So they try to go, oh, it's because he's saying that his will is the same as the Father's, but it's not because of his will, it's because of the Father's. No, that's not what it says. That's not what it says. You're just changing the words of it. Like literal, like eisegesis, man. And what's the point of this? What's the point of this eisegesis? It's like this guy doesn't even, like, I get, if you had this view, right? If you had this view that's very unusual, most Christians don't hold to it, and now you want to come on your channel and defend it in front of 10,000 viewers, wouldn't you do some research and find out the names of these things? Monophysitism versus diophysitism, two natures. Did Jesus have one nature or two natures? Wouldn't you do some basic research on this? What are you doing? What are you doing? You guys, and this is the other thing, like, I'm telling you, man, these guys come out here, yap. They never debated FGA. What, are you cowards? Why can't you debate those guys? You have to leave it to me and these kids, like, or whatever, or like laymen or whoever. Why don't you debate them? What are you doing? What are you doing? You cowards.
Entity or his deity. See, in my view, he wasn't just human, he was perfectly human. And so when it says he learned obedience and
was perfected,
well, or the idea would be completed, brought to full maturity, I think the point here is he was sent to do this. And until he did it, his Messiah work was not yet perfected.
well, you know, in Hebrews chapter 2,
It doesn't say that. Okay? It says that he was perfected. And it's because it was after that. So he learned obedience by the things which he suffered, Hebrews 5:8, and then 5:9, and being made perfect, because the things which he suffered was death, right? So, or the torture, then the death. Then that's done. He's the things. So he learned obedience by the things which he suffered. Now he's learned the obedience. It's done. The learning obedience is done. So now And being made perfect, that's the next step. That's the resurrection. Then the perfected flesh and all that stuff. Why is this hard? Why is this difficult? Or at least know what we think about it. Like, what are you doing? What do you do? You guys are embarrassing. Why don't you guys need to debate FGA, or you guys are probably all just shills, and they're trying to like split up the community and stuff, you know? That's what this is all about, probably, these shill idiots.
It says he became one of us. He shared in flesh.
Yet perfected.
Well, in Hebrews chapter 2, it says he became one of us. He shared in flesh and blood in order to be this one who leads us, this example for us.
Right.
So he learned obedience and was perfected in that he had never experienced suffering. He had never gone through what he had gone through. That's not the same thing as saying, okay, I'm going through this experience and now I want to sin.
So what you're seeing it as is he experienced these things.
Right.
In other words, when it says he learned obedience, it's he experienced obedience. He'd always been someone who was holy and mature
and could not sin.
And could not sin. And that didn't change.
That's the other thing. They always say that thing. He could not sin. He could not sin. And I get what they're going. I kind of get what they're going with this. Like, okay, he's God, so God cannot sin. I get that. But once again, it's the dual nature thing. This is important to our understanding of the Trinity, right? Like, or the hypostatic union. Like, so Jesus's human nature is not perfect. It's human. He's a human being. His God nature is constantly perfecting his human nature. So it's this ongoing process of perfecting him throughout his life. And then when he was made perfect, that's when he was like given his perfected body and stuff. Once he has a perfected body, now he's perfect. But before that, when he was just a human, he wasn't.
Someone who was holy and mature.
Or he was at that time too. But the thing is, it was because of a process of constantly being perfected by God, by his God nature.
Experienced obedience. He'd always been someone who was holy and mature
and could not sin.
And could not sin. And that didn't change with the incarnation.
And it didn't change in the Garden of Gethsemane.
No. And it didn't change on the cross. And it never has changed. Doesn't Hebrews say, Hebrews 13:8, he was the same yesterday, today, and forever?
Right.
Well, how?
So wait. Now they're trying to say, oh, he's yesterday the same and forever. So Hebrews also says that he was tempted just as we are, yet without sin. Tempted at all points, just as we are, yet without sin. So if he's tempted to sin, then why is he like, if he just has the exact same will as the Father, right? Is this guy trying to say that God is tempted to sin? What kind of stupid nonsense is this? These people don't know one thing. Or they know, obviously they know whatever they know. But they don't know what they're talking about right now. And like I say, it's not that hard to look up this stuff since you're already pretty expert in most of these areas. It's not that hard for you to go in your massive library or whatever, or just go online, just go on ChatGPT and just figure it out. You guys are idiots.
What you're seeing it as is he experienced these things.
Right.
In other words, when it says he learned obedience, it's he experienced obedience. He'd always been someone who was holy and mature
and could not sin.
And could not sin. And that didn't change with the incarnation.
And it didn't change in the Garden of Gethsemane.
No. And it didn't change on the cross. And it never has changed. Doesn't Hebrews say, Hebrews 13:8, he was the same yesterday, today, and forever?
Right.
Well, how could he be the same all the time if there was a short period of time where he wanted to sin?
Wanted to disobey the Father.
Well, so what? I don't understand. So, are they trying to say that he was not tempted, or they were saying something before, like being tempted is different than actually wanting to sin, or something like that? God, these guys are confusing weirdos, man. Look, Jesus. I mean, I guess that is the majority view in the Christian world that Jesus could not sin. It's like he was literally impossible for him to sin. And in a sense, it's true because he's God. But his human nature was tempted with sin, clearly tempted, right? So he was tempted, like as we are, yet without sin. And because he has suffered being tempted. So if he's tempted, doesn't that mean if you're tempted to sin, doesn't that mean you thought about it? Doesn't that mean, isn't that what that means? You're tempted to sin. It means you're thinking about it. You're like, oh, okay, I'm not gonna do it because or whatever. It comes into your mind. The thought enters your mind, right?
Hebrews 13:8, he was the same yesterday, today, and forever.
Right.
Well, how could he be the same all the time if there was a short period of time where he wanted to sin?
Wanted to disobey the Father. Right.
Wouldn't that be sin?
Yeah, and that's what we discussed in part 1.
No, is wanting to sin, or isn't actually sinning sin? If you want to sin, that's the temptation, right? Because when you're tempted to sin, that means you want to sin, right? Is that not what that means? So if I feel the temptation to sin, that means I want to sin. That's the temptation. And then if you don't actually do it, then that's good. That's what he did. So what are you talking about?
Right.
Well, how could he be the same all the time if there was a short period of time where he wanted to sin?
Wanted to disobey the Father. Right.
Wouldn't that be sin?
Yeah, and that's what we discussed in part 1. When does that happen? I don't want to do what I know the Father wants me to do. And you mentioned, well, if you're dwelling on it, perhaps there comes a point where you do it. So
right.
I'm going to imagine that most evangelicals would say, well, he never reached that point.
Right.
He still didn't want to do what the Father wanted him to do for that hour and a half or whatever it was. But
why? So now he has to want. He has to actually want exactly the same things as the Father in every moment of his life. That's what these guys think. Why would that be? How could he be a human being? How could he be a man if he wants he wanted to go to sleep at some point, right? Is that what his father wanted? Did his father want him to go to sleep or whatever? To eat food? Did his father want to eat food? So why did he want stuff? Yeah, verse 7 is totally confusing. That's the thing. They just skipped over verse 7. They're just confusing weirdos. Why would they do that? This is like some fast talking thing. This is the thing. You know what happens with a lot of these academics and stuff? They become like hucksters. They're like con men, kind of, It's like, can you get people to pay you money to go on stage and talk to them about stuff, right? And so that's becomes their job. And so it's more important to be able to look like you know what you're talking about than to actually know what you're talking about. You know what I mean? Because sometimes if you really know what you're talking about, people will accuse you of not knowing because they don't like what you're saying. So if you really want to kind of get people to oh, that's cool, bro. I'm so happy to hear that, man. That's awesome. I can't remember what I was saying. It doesn't matter. But look, these guys are weirdos. I don't hate these guys. I do think they're shills, honestly. At this point now, I just think they're shills. They're just idiots. And why don't they ever debate FGA? FGA is clearly a bunch of shills. These guys now, they split up with FGA, supposedly. Split up. I'm telling you, you know what this is? They're all shills. And these guys split up with FGA to split the free grace community and create this division. And they're just all shills. Everybody's a shill. Because Yankee Arnold, those guys, they actually act like shills. These guys too. They throw up hand signs. This conversation is dumb. It's embarrassingly dumb. It's so confusing and embarrassing that it's like shill evidence.
But he never.
But he was kind of open.
Yes, he was.
Right.
I'm going to imagine that most evangelicals would say, well, he never reached that point.
Right.
He still didn't want to do what the Father wanted him to
Wait,
do.
what point?
Short period of time where he wanted to sin.
Wanted to disobey the Father. Right.
Wouldn't that be sin?
Yeah, and that's what we discussed in.
No. Why is that sin? Why just wanting to sin is sin? Just having that desire? That's the temptation. That's not sin. And I know they were saying something about temptation and sin. I'm not going to go back to that, try to find that right now, but whatever that was, that's dumb. If you're tempted to sin, it means you want to sin. Obviously. If I'm tempted to sleep with a woman who's not my wife, that means I want to do that. When I don't do that, that means I resisted the temptation to sin. That means I did not sin. If I did it, that would be sin. And I guess there's this idea, like if you look on a woman to lust after her in your heart, that's sin also. Okay. So that's not the same thing as wanting to. That's when you're actually looking at her to lust after her in your heart. That's what Jesus said. So just wanting to sin is not sin, it's temptation. And Jesus was clearly tempted. Clearly. There's no doubt about it. He was tempted. So if you guys are trying to say that the mere fact that Jesus Christ wanted to sin means that he's not God or something, you're idiots. And also, you just don't even know. You were trying to say monophysitism. You guys just don't even know. You just don't even know what you're talking about. It's embarrassing.
Where he wanted to sin.
Wanted to disobey the Father, right?
Wouldn't that be sin?
Yeah, and that's what we discussed in part 1. When does that happen? I don't want to do what I know the Father wants me to do. And you mentioned, well, if you're dwelling on it, perhaps there comes a point where you do it. So I'm going to imagine that most evangelicals would say, well,
if you're dwelling on it and it comes to the point where you're doing it, then that means you did it. That's the sin. If you're dwelling on it, I guess, I don't know what dwelling on it means. But Jesus is about to face the most painful death of anyone, practically. And of course, he's going to dwell on it, especially the night before. And it's like, what is wrong with dwelling on it? Let's say you're dwelling on it. What are you talking about? What's wrong with that? I guess because Jesus said that thing about how if you look on a woman to lust after her in your heart, then you've already committed adultery in your heart or something like that, right? So that's kind of like dwelling on it, I guess, but that's not really dwelling on it. What he said was, if you look on her to lust after her, it's like you're ogling her. You're like, you know, when you know, like, you're married and stuff, you shouldn't try to look at some woman's assets, you know. But instead, you're looking at her, you're trying to like fantasizing about it. That's a sin, okay. But just thinking about sin or whatever, that's not sin. That's not sin. Anyway.
He never reached that point.
Right.
He still didn't want to do what the Father wanted him to do for that hour and a half or whatever it was.
Good point.
When does that happen? I don't want to do what I know the Father wants me to do. And you mentioned, well, if you're dwelling on it, perhaps there comes a point where you do it. So I'm going to imagine that most evangelicals would say, well, he never reached that point.
Right.
He still didn't want to do what the Father wanted him to do for that hour and a half or whatever it was. But he never.
But he was kind of open.
Yes, he was. I'm asking you to let me do this, and so that's not simple. And you and I both have a problem with that.
So basically, the learned obedience is simply that he experienced these things
in his incarnation.
You know, I have friends who hold the view that
learned obedience means he experienced these things. Well, that's just more eisegesis by these guys, you know. Why would I think learned obedience means he just? Why would I even think that? Why would anybody ever think that? Learned obedience means he experienced it by the things which he suffered. So by experiencing suffering, he experienced obedience. What? Anyway, this is dumb. This is just sad. This is wicked.
It's vitally important that Jesus didn't want to go to the cross because it shows that he was tempted like we were without sin. And sometimes these people actually say that Jesus could have sinned, but we're fortunate he didn't. Quite fortunate, because if he had sinned, then there would have been no kingdom. There would have been no everlasting life for anybody.
And he would have ceased being God.
Well, and the universe would have come apart, right? Because Jesus holds the universe together by his power. Everything would have collapsed if Jesus had sinned. And the idea that he could have sinned, to me, is absolutely contrary to the word of God. It's like saying, well, in the future, when we're glorified, we could sin. No, we can't.
That's something.
See what he says? It's the idea that Jesus could sin is contrary to the word of God, but he doesn't show you where in the Bible that's contradictory, or what are you talking about, right? Now he starts going into his theology. As if he knows, as if he's some master of theology when he just didn't even know what monophysitism is or whatever. And now he's trying to say that, what? This is so dumb.
Could have sinned, to me, is absolutely contrary to the word of God. It's like saying, well, in the future, when we're glorified, we could sin. No, we can't.
Why is that the same thing? Why is that the same thing as that? Because we know that in the future, when we're glorified, we have a glorified body. Right? But before Jesus had a glorified body, he had a human body, or just like a regular human body. and so he could sin. What are you talking about, Bob Wilkin? Why do you bring this? This is not relevant in any way to what you're saying. And you just literally just said that this belief that I hold to, that Jesus could sin, or I think he is the majority. The majority of Christians do hold to that belief or whatever. But he's trying to say now that, what's he trying to say?
He could have sinned, to me, is absolutely contrary to the word of God.
Okay, so where is it contrary to the word of God? Can you show me that? If you're trying to say, okay, Jesus is God, therefore Jesus couldn't sin. Okay, I kind of get where you're going with that. But the fact is, he's also human. So all we're saying is that it's possible for his human body to commit sins. And he was tempted. Clearly he was tempted. I don't know how you can be tempted to do something that you can't do. I can't be tempted to fly because I can't fly. But I can be tempted to steal a car, right? So what are you talking about? Once again,
sin, to me, is absolutely contrary to the word of God. It's like saying, well, in the future, when we're glorified, we could sin. No, we can't.
That's something.
No, again, it's not the same thing because we'll have glorified bodies. Jesus did not have a glorified body during his life on earth before he was resurrected.
It's like saying, well, in the future, when we're glorified, we could sin. No, we can't.
That's something that's rarely discussed, right? Will we be able to sin in eternity?
Right. And of course we won't.
Right.
But so I want to say, look, I don't think Hebrews 5:7-9 is saying anything about the fact that Jesus learning obedience means somehow.
Yeah, learning obedience wasn't even the main thing he was asking you about, Bob Wilkin. So I don't know whether you're actually being deliberately deceptive here or if you're actually this incompetent and dumb. But this is just embarrassing. This whole video is embarrassing. And this is my friend, you answering his question. What a joke. What an absolute joke. Yeah. Exactly. This is what I know. He's on the cross. He's like, oh, but I guess they'll say, you know, on the cross when he says, Father, or, you know, he says, Eloi, Eloi. He says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Right? So I think what these guys will say is that he's quoting Psalm 22. He's not actually saying that. I don't know.
Now that he desired ever to disobey.
And I want to say also, Hebrews 5:7-9 is not just Gethsemane. It's his time on the cross, you know, and so
Right.
that's another issue here because I think some people
Well,
say,
and his trials,
Sure,
his
his trial.
getting beaten and scourged.
right, all through that he experienced suffering, and he becomes an example for believers today who suffer for him, who will rule with him. That's the point.
Right. And 5:9, it's
What?
saying that he's
Suffer here because I think some people
well,
say,
and his trials,
Sure,
his
his trial.
getting beaten and scourged.
right, all through that he experienced suffering, and he becomes an example for believers today who suffer for him.
He experienced suffering, but it says he learned obedience by the things which he suffered. So the word experience doesn't appear here. You're just like adding this thing so you can just understand this in your theology, which I don't know why you guys feel the need to defend this theological view you have. Because you're kind of like all confused about it. You're saying all this weird stuff to your tens of thousands of viewers or whatever. This is embarrassing. You guys have PhDs. You guys run this whole ministry and stuff. Come on, man.
Him who will rule with him. That's the point.
Right. And 5:9, it's saying that he's the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him. The
Obey.
obedience, it means we're suffering with him.
Exactly.
And don't we see that in Romans, for example, chapter 8, verses 17 and following?
Right.
Co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, that we may be glorified together with him.
Right.
Well, I know we're out of time again,
That's a great question,
but it
Matt.
really is, Matt.
And as Bob said in part 1, meditate on these things.
No, because like even the suffering thing, right? When we suffer with him, we'll reign with him, right? But the suffering, if we go through that suffering, it's because we're being obedient, right? We're not denying him. We're suffering with him. Anyway, this is just embarrassing. This is so sad and dumb. Let's see what they say to Matt.
Right.
co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, that we may be glorified together with him?
Right.
Well, I know we're out of time again,
That's a great question,
but it
Matt.
really is, Matt.
And as Bob said in part 1, meditate on these things.
Yeah, you
This
may
is
not
cool
agree
stuff.
with this. Don't feel like you got to agree. But what I want you to recognize here is this is not a slam dunk that Jesus wanted to avoid the cross. In my opinion, it's a slam dunk. He wanted to go to the cross.
And read the article.
No, it's not. It's definitely not a slam dunk on your part. Maybe you might have. Maybe I don't really think you even like. It really pretty much is a slam dunk for us. And your arguments here are so dumb. Like I guess maybe in your twisted logic here, you could kind of say that it's not a slam dunk for us. But there's no way you can ever I don't know how you could possibly think it's a slam dunk for you. Are you mental? You don't like this is dumb. This is truly dumb. What he just said. And he just tried to say it first. He was saying that our belief is heresy. That's what he said in the other video. And he said we're nutty, right? That's what he said. And they're just laughing. It's like a big joke to them. And they're bringing out these words. They don't even know what they mean. Monophysitism. They don't know what monophysitism means. And they're trying to like talk to tens of thousands of people. They're PhDs and stuff, you know? They're acting like it's like a big joke. This is sad. This is embarrassing. If you guys have any guts, if you guys are actually men, you should debate those guys from FGA. Stop being goofs. Stop debating Steve Gregg or whatever. Debate those FGA guys. Settle this thing with the salvation thing, man. Cowards. Anyway, whatever. These guys are clowns.
Okay. I'm studying the Bible in Toronto. 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 Studying the Bible with Mike, Sam, Pat. These other YouTubers are just so trash. Hit the thumbs up if you wanna support. Go follow Mike as he follows the Lord. I'm studying the Bible in Toronto. 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 You better watch out, Mike's calling out the shills. If you're not free grace, you need to sit down and chill. We're not hyper grace, you know we keep it real. Eternally secure, you know that we're sealed. We don't back low, we're not workspace heretics. Mike's not in it for the money, trying to get a lick. They out here selling their souls for a couple clicks. Becoming Freemasons so they can't just get rich. I'm studying the Bible in Toronto. 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 Shout out to Mike, Sam, Pat. Check out his channel, Toronto Bible Study. Subscribe and like.